Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Fletcher, and we are continuing learning about wiring and taping for floral design. And so if you watched our last lesson, you learned to tape a Gerbera straw. It's a very forgiving piece of material to start with. And now we're going to try some actual plant materials. So I wanted to show you what the purpose of that Gerbera straw is. So this is a Gerbera daisy, and it is not looking happy. We would never sell this. This is beyond its prime, but it's a good example for what I want to teach you today. And so Gerberas are these big, beautiful flowers. We grow them in California in a few greenhouses in Southern California, and they are known for their color, and of course, they're very impressive in their size. However, they're also known because they have that big heavy head and somewhat of a weak neck sometimes to fall over. This one is extreme. And sometimes they come bent and you want the flower to be facing your customer. I have to get it in the right place, like that. And so it's fine that the neck is bent. But sometimes you would like the flower to be facing the sun in your design. And you are the human being, so you get to decide how it's going to be placed. And we have mechanics to help us do that. And one of those mechanics is this Gerbera straw that you worked with before. So the idea here is that the Gerbera straw goes up the stem and see how that supports it. However, I don't like to see plastic in designs. It looks unnatural. It looks unfinished. And it's loose. See how everything is wiggly? And so we can make that better. Let me show you how. So what you can do, and I realize you don't have a Gerbera necessarily in your pack today, but this is just future knowledge of how to do this. So you take a pair of scissors and you just cut up this straw lengthwise. And the reason you do that is so that the straw can then fold on itself and it can become tighter, right? It can become smaller. And then you fit it over the stem. All right. And so now it can be fit on there much more snugly than it was before because the pieces are overlapping themselves. But we still have the ugly mechanics. So this is where your taping skills come in. So you find the tape that you think is the most obvious match in terms of color. So that's our light green, that's our dark green, and hopefully you can see light is our better choice this time. So pull that off of your spool, right? And then this is just like how you tape before. You're going to start right at the neck of the flower where the Gerbera straw starts, and you would go around once to make it adhere to itself. And then once you've done that, you're going to just start angling down like we did in your exercise. And essentially what you're doing is you are making this a very strong stem now, so we can manipulate that flower and its placement, and you're also hiding all of your mechanics. Remember, your weak hand is here for a purpose. Your body heat is helping to meld together that tape and press it on there so it's nice and tight and smooth. And once you get to the bottom of the straw, so I have all this stem left, but once you get to the bottom of the straw, there's nothing left to hide, and this is most likely going to be hidden in your arrangement somehow, so you don't need to keep going. But let's say this was going to be visible, then you could just keep taping all the way down. Oops, I'm dripping a little bit here. Okay, rip it off. And now we have a flower that is much more supported and it's going the direction that we wanted it to go. Okay, so that's one example of taping. Now I'm going to talk to you today more about wiring and taping. Well, the reason that we wire is to give flower heads structure, to be able to move branches the way that we want them to go. So for example, if a branch is straight up and down and we want to have it at a right angle, one of the ways we can do that if it's flexible enough is to wire it, and then we bend the wire and that bends the stem. And then when we're doing what we call handwork, like corsages and boutonnieres, which will be the next step of what you learn, it takes the bulk out because we actually take the real stem off of the flower and we replace the real stem with a wire. And so what happens is it helps to make that corsage or boutonniere feel lighter, like jewelry, because a person should really not know, they should forget that they are wearing something like that. It shouldn't be this big bulky thing. But you can't do those things until you know how to wire. So let's just talk about floral wire for a second. So floral wire is just wire that is coated with a green enamel. And that helps to keep it from, well, first of all, it helps to hide it within the plant material. So again, we never want our mechanics to be obvious. And secondly, it helps to keep it from rusting also as it's touching water. So I made a little chart here to talk about wire. I hope that it is the right way for you to see. If you don't know this about wire, wire is sized opposite of what you would think in the world. And it's true in the floral industry as well. Let me see if I can see you and show this to you. So the bigger the number, the thinner the wire. So this 18 gauge wire is really strong. That would be like to hold up a flower head that's drooping, that's really a very large flower head, and you need to give it some support. That would be one example. We don't use that very often here in our lab. Size 24 is going to be thinner, and then size 26 is the thinnest one that we have here. 24 and 26 are considered acceptable sizes for corsage and boutonniere work, because there's no point in taking out a big heavy stem if you're just going to replace it with a big heavy wire. So again, I have a sad flower. I have a sad rose here. Okay, you can see that. It is completely bent over. Again, we would never sell this. This is beyond its prime, but it's a good example for today. And so one of the things you could possibly do here is to manipulate that rose head to make it stand up. Now this, if you talk to someone who worked in the floral industry a long time ago, they might say that they wired all of their roses. Like when they were going to make a dozen roses in a vase, they may have wired every single one, and maybe even wired and taped every single one, taping to hide the wire afterwards. But that was because at that time in agriculture or floriculture, we were growing roses that had heavy heads and weak stems, and they didn't have the ability to hold those heads up. And so you could either go straight up in a flower head with this, like you would use a heavy wire up into the calyx here. Okay, like that. And then you would wrap this wire around the stem to create that structure to hold it up. Or you can pierce the calyx here, right under the petals. This rose is falling apart. It's way too old. But it's a good example, I guess. And then you bend that down, and then you would take this wire, and you would go around the stem, and it just gives the stem structure. Now, I was talking about the old days. The beauty of genetics, right? And this is why there's a prerequisite for floral design. You have to understand selective breeding. We would never leave these thorns on either. This wasn't processed. You understand selective breeding. You understand GMOs. You understand the idea of continually making an agriculture product better through genetics. We now have roses. I'm going to let this guy go. We now have roses that are designed to have those nice large heads and a strong stem. And so it's very rare that we are taping roses for structure. In fact, if you're doing that, that could mean that you let your roses go too long before you sold them to the customer. They're a little too old. Or there's something going on in your processing when you receive the flowers that you're not caring for the flowers, or maybe the person before you didn't. The temperature's off in your cooler. You're not feeding the flowers. You're not putting floral preservative in the water. Something is happening that is causing those flowers to get what we call bent neck, which means that the head of the flower falls over and they are not really marketable anymore. So we would not use wiring and taping for that reason. anymore to support the head. That'd be a rare instance. But it's a good, every skill is good to know because you don't know your situation. You could be getting ready for a wedding and the last rose that you have has a weak neck, but you absolutely need it to finish the bride's bouquet. Then you better know how to do that little trick of wiring and taping so that you can make that bouquet look perfect. And that only has to last about 12 hours and it probably will work out just fine. So every skill is valuable no matter how often we're using it. All right, so at this point, I'm just going to show you a few different flowers and how we would wire and tape them. So you have carnations in your bucket today. See this green part below the petals, right? We would remove the stem. Don't use pruners. That's a time waster. You have tools right here called your hands. Remove the stem because we're getting the bulk of this. We're getting rid of this, right? Okay. And then you will take in your package, floral wire comes a couple of different ways. An 18 gauge wire or an 18-inch long wire is what we would typically use, but those are difficult to get home to you. So we've sent you home with some paddle wire. This is still floral wire, it's just in a different form. And so this is what we're going to have you use. So what you're going to do is take a piece of paddle wire and straighten it out. For this exercise, you probably only need it to be about 6 inches long. Okay. And you're going to take that, and you're going to pierce it straight through the calyx of the flower here. Don't worry about hurting the flower. Carnations are very, very tough. Just like that. Okay. After that, you take the two ends and you bend them straight down.